Angela might be in here in just a minute. She had just emailed me and said the link I'd sent her didn't work, so I resent it.
Huh. All right, well, we can get started and then hopefully she'll join in, and anybody else too that is joining. So I want to thank everybody for being here today. I think I've met most of you at this point, and my name is McKenzie Fox, and I work for the Kentucky Horticulture Council. I'm going to be leading us through this webinar today. And the training is intended for growers within the Tri-County area of Knox, Laurel, and Whitley counties, and then the surrounding area. But we're really happy to have anybody who's interested in learning about farm to school, or specifically our farm to school project today. So thanks everybody for being here, and I hope that we're able to build some partnerships, have some good discussions today. One benefit to having a small group is I think we can have more active discussion and not have to do so many polls and can actually just talk. So if you were in the webinar on Tuesday, we did some polls where something would pop up on your screen, but today I think we're just going to be able to have everybody participate if they want to. But at the same time, if you can keep your mic on mute unless you're speaking, that would keep the background noise from getting in the way of people hearing me. And you can type any questions that you have in the chat box, or at the end we'll open it up to questions, so you can also just say your question then. So to give you a little bit of an overview of what we're going to talk about today. So first I'm gonna do just a short little intro to the Kentucky Horticulture Council, and then we'll get into talking about farm to school, and specifically KHC's Farm to School project. The main section of this whole webinar will be about talking about how to sell to schools, and we'll get into how schools buy food, the details with what goes into that, and even talk about some of the crops that schools purchase now and might be willing to purchase in the future. Last thing we'll go over are the next steps, so either how you can be involved, or also what we're doing, what our future plans are. And then we'll have time at the end for a Q&A. So as I mentioned before, my name is McKenzie, and I work for the Kentucky Horticulture Council. I actually just started in this job about 2 months ago at the beginning of August, and I'm originally from Michigan. We moved down here in February, right before the pandemic. As my significant other works for the Forest Service, and so he took a job down here in London, and we moved down here. And then I started working for a farmer's market, and that was just a part-time job. So now I have a full-time job with the Kentucky Horticulture Council as their special projects coordinator, and one of the projects that I'm working under is a USDA Farm to School grant, which is what we're talking about today. But to give you a little history on the Kentucky Horticulture Council, it was kind of started in the early 1990s as different leaders of different segments of horticulture realized that having a unified voice might be beneficial for communicating with different universities and the government and just the citizens in the state. So KHC was established with kind of 3 main objectives, and those were to provide an opportunity to focus on common issues, to promote Kentucky horticulture to the state, and to organize support for statewide research, extension, and teaching programs at universities. So today we continue to support the horticulture industry, and we serve as a resource for info and education for growers and business owners. And to give you kind of a brief overview of what we're doing right now, we have a couple different projects, which include water quality testing at farms. We have 2 farm to school programs going on. We have a Kentucky Small Fruits Initiative, and we have cost share programs, including for GAP certification. And most recently, in addition to my project, there is a direct marketing project, and KHC recently hired another young lady named Bethany that is working on that project. So now I'm just curious who everybody here is. So we're not going to do a poll just because there's not that many of us, and I think we can all introduce ourselves. So I'm just going to go down the list and just tell us who you are, maybe who you work for, or if you're a farmer, then tell us your farm. And you can mention something really brief about why you're interested in farm to school if you want to, but you can just do at least your name and who you are. So I'm going to start with Arthur because he's the one that's immediately below me.
I'm Arthur Canada, and I live in Whitley County, and I'm working toward being a farmer, but right now I work for Brea College and Knox Promise neighborhood, and the principle of this grant fits pretty well with what the grant I'm working on does. So I talked to some of the higher ups today, and they're excited about possibly working, cooperating with your grant and working together.
Sorry, I'm muted. Cindy, can you go ahead now?
Yeah, if I unmute myself. Cindy Finiseth, I'm with the Kentucky Horticulture Council, and very excited about this project.
All right, Stacy, you're the next one.
My name's Stacy White. I work for the University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension Service. I'm the Whitley County Extension Agent for Agriculture and Natural Resources. And my interest in this program, part of what I try to do is just to encourage people to get into growing, grow more, better, make more money with what they are growing. When that's part of our job is to try to development. And in the agriculture area, I think local food, produce in particular, is an area that there's a lot of promise. So I'm glad to see this project being pushed.
Next I have Steve. I think that's Steve Crowley, maybe. Hey, Steve, can you hear us? All right, what about Jesse? Hey, Steve, can you kind of introduce yourself? All right, so Steve and Jesse, I guess maybe their audio isn't working, but they're from Crowley Farms. And I believe that is down near Corbin, I think is what you guys told me. If I'm wrong, go ahead and correct me in the chat box. And then looks like we have Angela Ledford.
Yes, my name is Angela Ledford. I work for the Knox County Public Schools as the Child Nutrition Director, and Mr. Canada actually invited me this evening, and we're hoping to get some farm to school started in Knox County Public Schools.
Awesome, thanks for joining us, Angela. And then lastly, looks like we have Bethany. Hey, Bethany, can you hear us? All right, so maybe Bethany's audio isn't working either. She also works for the Kentucky Horticulture Council. She's the one that I mentioned before, is working on the direct marketing initiative. So if I missed anybody, feel free to let me know by typing the chat box or unmute yourself at this time. But otherwise, I'm going to move on. Okay, so to give you kind of an introduction about what farm to school is, we probably all have kind of an idea of what we think it is, and that idea might be bringing locally grown food into school cafeterias, which at a very basic level, that is what farm to school is. But in order to do that and do that successfully, there's some other pieces that kind of contribute to the success of getting kids to eat the food and getting food service directors to source the local food. And that's where the education component comes in. And that really allows the program to be truly effective, because if, for example, you put out radishes on a school salad bar without ever introducing kids to the radishes, they might not necessarily take the radishes and put them on their salad. But if you do a little lesson in the classroom or even in the cafeteria and do a taste test and maybe read a book, then they will not be as intimidated in the cafeteria, and they might be more eager to actually eat it. And so that level of education just kind of sets you up really well for the farm to school program in the cafeterias to be well received. And then to get even further advanced in that, you can actually show the kids where their food is coming from by like a farm tour at an actual farm, or, you know, in this case where we're going through COVID right now, we're doing like virtual farm tours. And at an even more kind of extreme level of education would be having a school garden where the kids are actually growing their food and are able to see that food going from maybe the garden and into the cafeteria. And it might not actually be the food that they grew in the garden in the cafeteria, but at least they can make that connection and understand where that food came from. So ultimately, the end goal with Farm to School is to foster the local food movement, get local food into our cafeterias, and have that be well received. And education is just kind of how you get there. And of course, we all like to support our local community and like to do community building. And so by having local food in school cafeterias, we are doing that. We are supporting our local community, our local farmers, and our local economy. So now, if anybody wants to share, out of the 3 topics that I kind of talked about with Farm to School, which piece are you guys most interested in? And you can either share by typing in the chat box, or feel free to unmute yourselves right now and you can kind of share where your interests lie. And it might be in all of the different pieces. All right, so it looks like we have 2 people saying the local food in the cafeterias. Arthur says all of the above. Stacy White says the education piece. And that's great. For me, I really am interested in all of the pieces. So my background is actually education. I was going to school to be a teacher, and so that piece is really interesting to me. And as a teacher, you know, you're helping kids learn lifelong skills to hopefully become competent adults, which is also eating healthy. And so I am really interested in all of the pieces, which is cool because I get to work on this project. And I think that's all I see in the chat box, so we will move on. So to give you a little bit of background on the project that I am working on. So KHC, which is the Kentucky Horticulture Council, which is who I work for, received a USDA Farm to School grant earlier this year. And of course, it was all written pre-COVID. And so there's a lot of changes that have had to occur, but our objectives are still very much the same. And so the Tri-County area that we're focusing on, as I mentioned before, is the Knox, Laurel, and Whitley counties. But we are totally excited about local growers in the surrounding area of those counties providing to the schools as well. But the schools that we're looking to work with are in those 3 county areas. There's 3 main activities that we are hoping to accomplish through our project. And the first one is to recruit school food service personnel and also students, which will result in an increased interest, demand for, and receptivity to consuming locally produced items. So that's kind of what we're doing right now. Cindy and I are meeting and training food service directors on purchasing local foods, and we're also doing some educational programming in the schools, or at least working towards that. The second piece of our project is what we're actually doing right in this webinar, which is to provide technical assistance to growers to increase comfort and knowledge about navigating the school food market procurement process, and just making sure that growers are able to satisfy school purchasing requirements. And so this training will be a part of that, but we're also going to host many future trainings that'll get more deep into the different topics that we're going to talk about today, and even some of the topics that we're not going to talk about. And then lastly is kind of an interesting piece of our project that's not super related to the first two pieces that are more education and training based, but that's product development. So I think this is really cool. Cindy wrote this into the grant of developing a local snack food for use in schools that is all locally sourced. So we are basically experimenting and conducting market research on this snack food, which will be popcorn, dried blueberries, and dried apples, and will be all stuck together with honey. And we are hoping that that will fulfill school nutrition requirements and be able to be used as a snack food in schools, but also support our local farmers, because we want all of that to be from Kentucky growers. So as I mentioned before, COVID, just like with everybody else in every other sector of the world, has really kind of presented some challenges, but kids still need to eat, and so we still think that there's plenty of opportunities to do this work. So thus far, our work has really kind of focused on building relationships with farmers and food service directors. I've mainly been working with Whitley County Schools and Williamsburg Independent Schools, but also some teachers in other school districts like Corbin. And the educational programming that I've been working on includes a Harvest of the Month program and curriculum. And the idea with that is that kids could be introduced to a new local food every month during the school year. And that local food could be in the cafeteria, so it could be like a tasting once a month, but there would also be some educational programming, some activities that would take place in the classroom in order for that to be well received. And then due to COVID right now, as I mentioned before, we're doing some virtual farm tours. And if anybody who's on the call and has a farm is interested in participating in that, please let me know. I just finished up my first virtual farm tour this week with Sustainable Harvest Farm, and that was really fun. So now getting into the nitty-gritty, the stuff that you were probably most interested in, and that is how to sell to schools. So there's kind of a couple of things that you should probably have in place, but likely you might already have in place. And that first thing would be product liability insurance. And this is just to protect you from anybody claiming that they suffered illness from the product or food you provide. And like I said, many of you probably already have this in place, but it just also positions you to sell to grocery stores, farmers markets, and restaurants. And schools have a wide range of what they require, ranging from $100,000 to $3 million in product liability insurance. And so it kind of depends on the school, what you need to have. And actually, there is a program funded through CAIP, right, Cindy, that will pay for part of your product liability insurance for the first year. And so if you're interested in that, go ahead.
So, yeah, generally people call that CAPE. And Stacy, is that administered through Extension in Whitley County?
No, our Whitley County Cattlemen's Association administers CAPE in Whitley County.
Okay. It's a little different depending on what county you're in, but under the food safety category, growers can get, if the county allows it and they score high enough to be selected, growers can get a 50% cost share on that insurance for the first year. So that makes it a little bit more affordable. So for growers in Whitley County, they can check in with Stacy or the Cattlemen's Association about deadlines for applying. And then Knox and Laurel, I would just start at the county extension office, either with Wayne or with Glenn or Bonnie in Laurel County, Wayne in Knox County, about who administers it in that county and if it's offered. But that makes it very affordable if that's a program offered in the
and folks can get the information through our office. I take care of the agents take care of the educational requirements for that program. So we're all in tune with what's going on in our counties.
Awesome. So you can certainly contact Stacy or myself or Cindy, and we can get you in contact with the right people that, if you're interested in that. And then I did want to mention GAP certification, and so far, none of the schools that I have worked with thus far require GAP certification, but there are some larger school districts that do require that. And if nothing else, it is just another thing to set you up to sell to large distributors like Creation Gardens. And there is a cost share program for GAP, for the GAP audit through KHC that will pay for up to 75% or $1,250. And those applications for this year are due in December. And you do have to be a member of Kentucky Proud, which I'll talk about in a little bit, is really not hard. And so it should be pretty easy for you to do that. But at a very minimum, you should have produce best practices training, which is offered through Extension before you're selling to schools, because it's just showing that you are committed to food safety and you know what you're doing when delivering food to the schools. So there's a couple ways that schools purchase foods, and I'm going to start with the most complex way, and not meaning to like intimidate anybody, because this is a way that probably, at least in the beginning, most farmers won't be using. I'm going to get into those ways in a couple minutes, but I just wanted to mention this so that you have an understanding of how schools purchase food. So the first way is through formal procurement, and this is for very large purchases, so purchases over $20,000. And this is like what Gordon Food Service or Creation Garden or another large distributor, this is the process that they would go through in order to sell to schools. And so there's a public notification, which is basically like an advertisement in the newspaper or online, and a sealed bidding process. So those large distributors or a big farm, for example, would reply to that bid, giving their prices for the specifications that were given, and then the food service director or the school would choose who won the bid. But like I mentioned, there are other ways that you can sell local foods to schools, and that way is the most complicated and likely will not be the route that we will go on, at least in the near future. So the two routes that most Kentucky growers sell to schools, especially smaller schools, is informal procurement or through the small purchase threshold, which those are the same thing, or micro purchasing. And so informal procurement is for purchases that are less than $20,000. And it is also known as 3 bids and a buy because a food service director or a school has to approach 3 different vendors and get quotes from them. And those price quotes can generally just be verbal. And the 3 vendors that they approach could all be local vendors, which is why it would be one way to really easily get local foods into schools. Now, micro-purchasing is even less complicated than that. And in micro-purchasing, schools can spend up to $10,000 for a one-time purchase, and there is no need for bids. So they don't have to call 3 different vendors to get quotes. And that's great for really small events or for like one-time purchases like tastings or those Harvest of the Month programs that I was mentioning before. And when a food service director would do micro-purchasing, they would rotate vendors in order to equally distribute the money that they're spending. And so, for example, if we were doing a Harvest of the Month program, and let's say in October, the food service director wanted to feature local apples on the menu one day. So they might buy those apples from one farmer, and then let's say the next month, they wanted to feature pumpkin pie made with homemade and made with pie pumpkins. they would buy those pie pumpkins from a different vendor, because the idea is not to give all of those one-time purchases to one person. And the one caveat that I'll throw in with this is that school districts can have more restrictive thresholds. So they can actually have, like, their informal procurement purchase threshold might actually be $10,000, and maybe their micro purchasing threshold is $3,500. It all kind of depends on the school. But, you know, that's why communication is really important. And you don't need to like memorize all of these ways right now, because once you start working with the schools, you'll be able to work these things out. But this is just to give you an overview so that if you are talking to a food service director, kind of have a basic understanding of how they might purchase foods from a grower. And another piece of that is that food service directors will also often have specification sheets or specs that are basically showing you what they expect of you for the food that you are going to deliver from them. And this is just an example. So this is an example sheet for lettuce, and it has like the size and the grade, how many they want, like how they want it to be packed. So how many in a box. How they want you to give your price quote. So in this case, this is by the case, the ripeness, the delivery, if there's any growing preference for local and what that growing preference is, and then anything else that they are hoping or requiring of farmers. And this is generally used when there's an actual bid process, but also just with micro purchasing too, so that you know what you're expected to give. And in the bidding process, you might think that you don't really have like an opportunity to compete with really big distributors like Gordon Food Service, because they might be able to sell stuff really cheap. But food service directors do have the ability to give local preference, and they might do that through the specification sheet, in which, like you can see down here, they wrote growing preference. So they want grown within 75-mile radius. Or another way to do that is to say it needs to be harvested within 48 hours of delivery, or delivered within 48 hours of harvest. And another way that they'll do it sometimes is they'll say, we want you to be able to provide a farm tour or a classroom visit. But we'll get more into that in future trainings. This is just to kind of show you that this is what a specification sheet might look like, so that you know what you're expected to fulfill with the product that you are providing. And one piece of that is delivery. And I wanted to mention this because it can be challenging for farmers to deliver to each school, particularly if it's like a big school district or a county school district, and there's lots of different schools within that county. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a problem. One, you might sell to a school that's really small, like Williamsburg, and it has only one location. Or you might work it out with the food service director to only sell and deliver to the schools nearest you. So it's all about working with the food service director. And then, of course, another option too could be if there's other farmers that are selling to those schools, you guys could coordinate and work together so that you don't both have to drive to the schools. And then I wanted to mention payments, because it's probably a little bit different than what everybody is used to. So payments with a school are generally going to be a little bit delayed in comparison to what you might get like at a farmer's market, where you're getting immediate payment. So you would bring the invoice with the food when you deliver the product, but you will not be paid right away. And payments generally come after the Board of Education meeting. And so it all kind of depends on when the Board of Education meeting is, because if you deliver, let's say, the week before a Board of Education meeting, you might be paid in 2 weeks. But let's say you come the week after the Board of Education meeting, and so you have to wait a whole nother month, so you might not be paid for 4 weeks, or even longer. So they will pay you eventually, but you just need to know that it's not immediate. And so you have to communicate with the food service director so you know when you are expecting payment for the food. And one incentive for food service directors and schools and also farmers is the Kentucky Proud program. And so Everybody, or maybe some of you, have probably heard of the Restaurant Rewards Program, which has now been rebranded as the Kentucky Proud Buy Local program. And typically that's an incentive program for restaurants to source local food, and it actually can be used for schools as well. And so it incentivizes schools to buy local food by providing up to 15% reimbursement. And so that can be a really good incentive for a school to want to purchase from you, because even if your prices might be a little bit higher, maybe that can be made up by the 15% reimbursement. And so you do have to be a member of Kentucky Proud. And like I mentioned earlier, it's actually very easy to do that. You just go to kentuckyproud.com, you fill out an application, and they will approve it. And there's a lot of other benefits to becoming a Kentucky Proud member as well. And it's just, I mean, it's so easy that there's no reason not to. There's advertisement through their website. You can search farms and search different produce growers, and so there's a lot of benefits to doing this, not just being able to sell to schools and have that extra reimbursement. All right, so I think that all of that can sound really intimidating, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. So the key here is communication and relationships, just like many things in life. Schools, fortunately, do have really big vendors that are their primary vendors, like Gordon Food Service. And so they can adjust to issues you may have, excuse me, because if you let them know, they can order from their primary vendor. So for example, maybe you had a late freeze or you had flooding problems and you're not able to fulfill what you had established with them. But if you communicate with them and let them know as soon as you know, they can usually resolve that issue. Like I said, it can be easy for them because they can just order through their primary vendor, who generally won't have those problems because they have so many suppliers to them. All right, so now getting into some fun stuff, talking about crops. This is a little quiz, and so you can type your answer into the chat box. So these are the top 5 fruits and veggies that are used in Whitley County schools, and which one do you guys think they buy the most of? And this is in terms of pounds. So which one do they buy the most pounds of?
There's a ringer in there.
So we have
on so we could hear if it's the same in Knox County, but she had to drop off for a personal commitment.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll have to ask her then.
Yeah, for sure.
So there's apples, bananas, cucumbers, grapes, and tomatoes. These are their top 5 fruits and veggies used in Whitley County. And you guys guessed tomatoes, and bananas. And Arthur was correct. So last year, just from August to March, right before COVID happened, they used almost 40,000 pounds of bananas, which is a lot of bananas. In a not so close second was apples at 18,000 pounds, grapes at almost 14,000 pounds, and then maybe the ones that are most interesting to our growers are cucumbers at almost 10,000 pounds and tomatoes at 6,000 pounds. So of course I know that, Kentucky growers cannot grow bananas. So here are some local friendly ideas for what you could grow that the schools would still use. There's still a ton of veggies that they're already buying and that you guys are already producing. So lettuce is one of those items that Whitley County schools indicated they would be interested in buying from a local grower. And last year, again, from August until March, They used over 3,500 heads of lettuce and over 500 pounds of spring salad mix. Tomatoes, as I mentioned before, are a really big thing too, and Sharon from Whitley County Schools told us that the kids love cherry tomato, and they used around 2,000 pounds of cherry tomatoes last year, and then 1,000 pounds of grape tomatoes. And then cucumbers, I had already mentioned that being almost 10,000 pounds. Broccoli is 4,000 pounds, which was probably one of the most surprising ones to me. And then cauliflower actually also at 1,700 pounds. And carrots, they buy around 5,000 pounds. And I didn't mention onions on there, but I wanted to mention it here. So they buy over 1,000 pounds of onions. And like I said, this was not even like a whole school year, because this was just August of 2019 to March of 2020. So that is a lot of produce, and there's a lot of opportunity here for us to get local growers to supply even just a small fraction of the food that the local schools are buying. And then Williamsburg School is another school that I've been working with, and they are on a much smaller scale, of course. They purchase a lot of the same things as Whitley County Schools, but she also expressed some interest in some products or some food that I thought was particularly interesting to our local growers, which was yellow squash and zucchini, potatoes, green beans, and green peppers, which are all things that can grow in Kentucky. So if I haven't convinced you yet, I hope that this slide will convince you that you should sell to schools. And one of those reasons that I think you should sell to schools is that school cafeterias are the largest food service in the state, and they serve over 130 million meals per year, which is millions, possibly billions of dollars in food and local produce that they are purchasing. Sorry, not local produce, but hopefully local produce. Another reason is that it's a fairly reliable market, because kids go to school, and even when kids are not going to school and are doing virtual learning, they're still feeding them. So they're going out there and distributing their little lunches, or the kids are coming and picking up their lunches. And so that's a really reliable market to have. And they also will always pay. You know, they will not stiff you and let you go without being paid for the product that you're providing. And another benefit with that reliability is that they can predict their needs more accurately, because they have all of this data on how much they've purchased in the past, and they usually have a good idea of what they're going to do for their menus weeks or months in advance. So, you know, that's just really nice for farmers to have that reliability and accuracy. And then, as we have all seen, and COVID has demonstrated, it is always good to diversify the markets that you're selling to. You know, earlier this year, a lot of farmers had the problem with like UK and universities, as well as restaurants. You know, they planned for all this food for those restaurants and universities, and then COVID happened and they were no longer able to supply it to them because they didn't need it. So this is one way to kind of diversify where you are selling and just make you more resilient. And then some benefits that are not necessarily a benefit to you, but are a benefit to our community, are that you're providing children with local, nutritious food, and you're educating them on where their food comes from. So even if you're not in the classroom or you're not in the cafeteria, the kids are learning about where their food comes from by eating local foods. And that's also part of my job. So maybe you are not ready to sell to schools, but there are other ways that you can be involved in Farm to School. And one of those ways is through the educational programming that we're doing. And like I mentioned before, if you're interested in a farm tour video, please let me know. I did the most recent one with Sustainable Harvest Farm in London, Kentucky, and that was really fun. And he had his 3 kids be involved, and it's also really good promotion for your farm, because it'll be posted on Facebook and used with teachers, and so just extra free advertising. In the future, we're hoping to do farm tours and classroom visits, so you could be involved in that way. And then maybe not either of those ways, but on a very basic level, you can encourage people in your community to get on board with Farm to School. So your school officials, your teachers, any staff that you know from the schools. And that will just help us out a lot because we need to build those connections in order to have our Farm to School program and have it be sustaining even past the grant. So for the next steps, I'll start with what KHC is going to do, and then I'll kind of mention what you guys can do. So KHC, we will be continuing to host future webinars and trainings. And like I said, not just on a very basic level, but we're going to try to delve more deeper into the topics to prepare you very well to sell to schools. We're also planning to host some grower and food service director meetups, as well as anybody else that might want to be involved in that. I can connect you with food service directors, or if you're a food service director, I can connect you with growers. And I am working on those educational programming for schools. So maybe you're totally ready to start with Farm to School, and here are some things that you can do right now. So you can fill out your W-9, which is what a school will need for you to sell to them. Possibly they might need more forms, but on a very basic level, you will need to have a W-9. You need to ensure you have product liability insurance, and like we mentioned before, if you are interested in the CAPE cost share program, you can get in contact with the people that can help you do that. You can start thinking about crops that you might want to grow and sell to schools. When thinking about, I'm sure a lot of people are planning for next spring what you're going to grow, but also getting into like next fall. And as I mentioned before, you can contact me to be connected with food service directors or growers. And certainly contact me if you want to be involved in educational programming. I am still looking for more farms to do our farm tours, and it doesn't matter if you are a big farm or a small farm. I think it's awesome for kids to see either way. All right, so now, as I mentioned, we're going to be hosting some trainings in the next few months about getting into those deeper topics. And so here are some of the ideas that Cindy and I came up with for topics that we might do trainings on. So I want to know what you guys want to see or how we can help you sell to schools. So now would be a time when you could unmute yourself. And if you are not interested in selling to schools, but are interested in another piece, how you can talk about how you would be involved in that, or how you can see us working together. And so you can unmute yourself, or you are welcome to type in the chat box. At the very least, type in the chat box maybe the topic that you think you're most interested in, or you think that farmers would benefit the most from.
McKenzie, the food safety training, would that be virtual or in-person training?
Well, I believe that Extension is mostly doing it through virtual right now. Oops. But we have talked about doing some in-person trainings, certainly for people that don't have internet access. And so we would just, take precautionary measures, like have it outside or something like that. Wear a mask, all of the COVID guidelines. But Cindy, they are Extension, the ones that they're hosting are virtual right now, right?
Yeah, and Stacy can help answer this a little bit too. So the FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act, Produce Safety Rule Training, that Paul Vijay Kumar at UK heads that program up, and those are being virtual right now. So that's a full day in front of the computer going through the different educational modules to be in compliance with FSMA. So any grower in the US that has food sales that exceed $25,000 per year, and that's an average of 3 years, is required to go through that produce safety rule training. And it's like the big deal, deep dive, covers everything from water quality, post-harvest handling, that sort of thing. The next one of those is in November, and those are being offered at no cost to growers right now. And like, again, it's a virtual training, and you get a workbook and you go through it through that whole training. So I think November 20th maybe is the next deadline, but that's on our website, on our calendar, our training calendar. And then each year Extension hosts produce best practices training, and that's like a minimum level of training. And my understanding is that those are being done virtually right now, but that I guess may change. And like I said, Stacy may have more information on that. But that's kind of the two basic required food safety trainings. But if there was something else, like along food innovation or processing or food safety and storage, some very specific narrow topic, that's something we could do a training on, and we could do it either virtually as a webinar, or we could do something in person. Like McKenzie said, if we can ensure social distancing, maybe we could do it at the pavilion at the extension office. So certainly if there's a specific topic, happy to, coordinate something like that.
Cindy, our facilities are back open with certain guidelines, so we can have in-person meetings, but we're encouraged to do virtual meetings if possible. So in a normal world, we would have the GAP training usually is in Laurel County. Bonnie's the horde agent up there. She usually conducts that, and our growers will go there. I've had one or two go to that. I've not had one in Whitley County specifically, but I've had growers go to that one. It's kind of an area meeting. But our facility is an option. Outside is less strict than inside.
Mm-hmm.
This is not on your list, but you had mentioned trainings for the food staff at the schools. What would that training consist of?
You kind of broke it up there. The food service directors, is that what you said?
The food service trainings that you mentioned earlier, what would they consist of?
So that would probably be going more deeply into what I mentioned about how schools would buy local foods. So talking about the bidding process and just the different rules around that, because it is a lot more detailed and complicated than just what I went through. That was just to give you an overview. But Tina Garland works off, and she's from KDA, so the Kentucky Department of Ag, and she does farm to school, and she works a lot with the food service directors. So if we are to host a training for our food service directors, that would probably be the person that would do that. But I've also thought about further down the line about just if food service, not necessarily food service directors, but food service workers need more training about how to prepare the foods, I think that could definitely be an opportunity too. So going through, how to prepare different vegetables and how to cut them up and how to cook them, how to make them taste good for the kids, because as Arthur and, we were talking about today, a lot of schools do dump and warm. So, the food is already prepared when they get it. And so I think that there are certainly opportunities for that too.
And KDA actually has a chef as part of the farm to school program. So I think that's something we could probably coordinate to get that person down here. And especially if, I know Corbin has a junior chef program. I don't know if some of the other schools do, but, that may be an opportunity we could maybe purchase some local product and then do something in the school with either the food service staff or the students. But that may be a good way to get buy-in with sort of the lunch ladies if we were able to take real fresh tomatoes in so they could, slice them and try them, or, something, maybe something that's a little more unusual, like kohlrabi, that maybe they haven't tried before. We could maybe do some of that so that they would be more excited about providing that to the kids. I think we could definitely do something like that.
I wonder, Cindy, that might be a place for Promise Neighborhood to jump in. If there was an early spring crop or a cold weather crop, that is something that we could get a hold of sometime, before school ends this year, and pick a location that is handy to all the school districts, like maybe the tech center in Corbin. It'd have to be someplace with a kitchen, so probably the extension office or something like that. But invite the food service coordinators and probably the family and consumer science teachers from the schools, because I know Whitley has family and consumer science, Linkamp does, Corbin does. Corbin has the culinary program. I think Lincoln Camp and Whitley both have culinary programs.
Mm-hmm. And you know, one thing I was thinking about the Crowleys on here. Am I correct that they do microgreens and do sprouts? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah.
Because that would be something that maybe food service directors had never used or tried before, or food service staff. And that could be a really cool thing for them to try. So I think that could be, and we do have some growers, you know, that use high tunnel technologies that would have early spring crops that I think would be very interested in. We could maybe show those videos so they get to meet the farmer. So kind of bringing that to them as well. So yeah, I think let's definitely do that. Let's look at maybe some tentative dates in the spring and some of the growers within the counties and plan something.
Even if we're still distancing at that point, I know right now I'm working on something with Sally Gap Farms for Halloween with our third graders that I'm putting together virtual, well, not virtual, but jack-o'-lantern kits that will go home with the students. And our teacher's doing videos on decorating those, and family and consumer science teacher is putting videos together to send home with how to prepare the pumpkin once you're done with it artistically. So, so stuff, everybody's learning to make things work at a distance. It's still not as good as being in person, but it's what we have right now.
And you know what, maybe we could partner with that, Arthur, is we could do like a farm tour video at Sally Gap so the kids could see where their pumpkins are coming from.
Yeah, I just shot that last Wednesday.
Oh, you did? Cool.
Yeah, but I'm sure you would do a better job. And if you ever met Rich Metters and his kids up on the farm, you probably need to go up and shoot some video and meet them.
Cool. Well, that's awesome. So we are doing some very similar work that could overlap and to partner on.
Oh, yes. Like I said today, I was excited when I heard it. And I forwarded some information on to Kelly Moore, our director, and her assistant. And they got back to me real quick. They were excited about it. I'm going to connect you all where they can talk to you because they'll do a better job explaining this neighborhood than me.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Let's see what the chat box says. Anybody responded? It looks like Jesse said crop specific recommendations, and so did Steve. I'll write that down.
Do you have specific crops in mind? Because that's something that, you know, Stacy and I can coordinate very easily to get, you know, some very specific training on specific crops.
Well, they haven't responded, but I was thinking maybe that would be like, maybe they're interested in what crops. Yeah, okay. He said, generally speaking, we're looking for crops that would work well with our farmers markets too. So I think it could be like kind of a, go ahead, Cindy.
Oh, sorry, I was thinking, you know, maybe more seasonally. We could look at kind of those broad seasons of like what would be good crops for spring, for summer, for fall, for winter. And then, you know, so like a quarterly sort of training and then dive deep into some of those specific crop recommendations. We could definitely do that.
And I like Steve's point about, you know, crops that would work well for the schools, but also for farmers markets too, because then you're diversifying and doubling your opportunities. And
for sure. And you're going to get a much better, well, generally you're going to get a much better price selling direct to consumer, farmers market, off farms. So having those two different marketing channels is good, because then, you know, you can accept a little bit lower price maybe for the volumes moving through the school channel if you're getting, you know, your production cost and profit from your direct market sales. I think that's a good idea to look strategically at where you can sell those different products.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I want to get to, if anybody has any questions, I'll go back to this. This is our contact information. But does anybody have any other questions or ideas that they wanted to mention?
Is the 15% Kentucky Proud reimbursement, is it in place for restaurants right now?
Yes. I think they have to apply to it, but yes, they can participate in that. Yeah. And it depends
Okay.
too. It's on like a scale. So it's up to 15% because it depends on like what they're buying. Like it has to be grown and produced in Kentucky. And then like there's like another scale that I guess I don't really know what the 3 tiers are. Yes, and the 15% is capped at a certain number. Cindy, do you know what the 3 tiers are that they would get like different amounts for based on what exactly?
Yeah, it depends on farm impact. So the highest tier is, you know, for 100% grown on the farm, local, well, produce. Produce is what I have on my mind, but it can be proteins as well. It's not just for produce. But so like potatoes or tomatoes or leafy greens, that's the highest tier. And then processed, so if it's a portion has direct farm impact, then it's at a different tier. And then things that are just processed in Kentucky are at a different tier. So those go down, you know, what the reimbursement is. And yeah, there is a cap, a lifetime cap on that of what a restaurant can apply for and what schools can apply for. But this year, because of what's happened with restaurants and COVID, they have a larger pool of money. So normally that will run out, you know, kind of in the third quarter. And this year it hasn't. So if there's anyone that you know that is buying products, then they should look at submitting those for reimbursement, because KDA still has a pretty flush pool of money for that program.
I was trying to see. I know I have the cap written somewhere. Do you know what the cap is?
I think it's 30,000 a year.
Okay, yeah, that's about what I was thinking too. Okay, is there anybody else that has anything? Steve said you have the 3-year data for lettuce sales for Whitley County schools. So you were talking about this, and nope, keep going. So you did not mishear that. Oops. It was 3,500, or it is 3,500 heads. And they did buy 500 pounds of spring mix as well. So the Whitley County schools don't have a salad bar like every week or every day. So I think I remember her saying that they have them like a couple times a month. So that's probably why their lettuce sales seem low to you.
I know at Lincoln schools, there's a salad bar. Well, not this year, but most years there's a salad bar every day.
Mm-hmm.
And my understanding, which I never, you know, really thought about it very much, but I love radishes. And so the cooks will always let me know when they've got radishes in. And I was always under the assumption that they were just getting them because they were commodities at that time.
I'm not sure. I guess I didn't realize that commodities could be fresh fruits and vegetables. I thought it was like
No.
canned stuff.
I don't know if it is. I might have just made that up in my head because nobody has told me that.
I'm not sure about that. I know
Right.
when we were talking to Williamsburg, the commodities that she bought were like meat and canned fruits and that kind of thing.
And you know, radishes are a great option for farm to school because along, you know, they're a quick crop. You can have successive sowing dates. They store well. You just probably couldn't move a huge volume because they probably don't buy that much of it. But I think, you know, radishes, you know, if you can, and you know, this is something we have not talked about, but thinking about root crops reminds me. So you have to think about the form that the food service staff, you know, get it in. So like, it's going to have to be really clean is what I'm getting at. So if you have carrots or potatoes or radishes, you know, root crops, they're going to have to be clean because the staff is probably not going to go through a lot of work of washing, you know, and probably will be a little irritated if they come in dirty, even though, you know, that's not that big a deal. But that's something to think about is when you're preparing those crops for delivery, you would have to be able to have the capacity to wash those and have them, you know, clean in the form that they would normally get if they were getting it from some food service company.
That's a great point. All right, does anybody else have anything? Steve, I will check with Sharon about that, about her half cup of lettuce 3 times a week, because that would be a lot more than what I had mentioned before. So I'll let you know what she says. But if nobody else says anything, this is Cindy and I's contact information. And I also included Tina Garland on there because she's really like kind of the procurement expert. She's the one that we talk to learn about procurement, and she knows a lot about farm to school. So you can always talk to me or Cindy, and then we can connect you with Tina if we don't know the answer. But if you want to just reach out to her, that's totally cool too. And with that, I think that's pretty much all I have. Thank you again for joining. I'm really excited about the partnerships that we are building and the great things that we have planned for this grant. And Cindy, do you have anything else?
No, I don't. I appreciate everybody joining, and certainly, you know, contact us if there's anything we can do to help.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. I hope you have a great evening, and go enjoy your dinner if you haven't already eaten it, and we'll see everybody soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.